I'm more than pleased that you like my work. I have to admit that it looked pretty damn good from where I was sitting.
They offered him millions, but he said no. Sean Connery walked away from James Bond forever after a secret battle that almost destroyed him. The movie bosses treated him like dirt. Paparazzi stalked him 24/7, and he was so angry he donated his entire paycheck just to escape. Even when they begged him to come back with $5.5 million, he slammed the door in their faces. Now, we know the ugly truth behind why he walked away. Sean Connery was born on August 25, 1930, in the Fountain Bridge area of Edinburgh, Scotland. His full name was Thomas Sean Connery. He was the eldest of two sons. His father, Joseph, worked in a factory and drove a truck. His mother, Euphemia, was a laundress. They lived in a small two-room flat in a tenement building with no indoor plumbing. Fountain Bridge was a working-class neighborhood filled with breweries and factories. Life was tough, and money was always tight. By the age of 7, Connery was already working. He delivered milk for St. Cuthbert's Cooperative Society. It was a job that had him waking up before dawn and learning every shortcut in Edinburgh. Years later, when he was famous, he once caught a taxi driver trying to overcharge him. Instead of arguing, he simply directed the driver through the fastest route in the city, surprising him with his knowledge. His family struggled even more when his younger brother, Neil, was born in 1938. To help out, Connery took on more responsibilities. He grew fast and earned the nickname Big Tam. By 13, he left school to work full-time as a milkman. His family needed the income more than he needed an education. At 16, Connery joined the Royal Navy. He planned to serve for 12 years, but things did not go as expected. After just 3 years, he was discharged due to severe stomach ulcers, a condition that ran in his family. While in the Navy, he got 2 tattoos, one that said Mum and Dad, and another that read Scotland Forever. They were reminders of his roots and remained on his skin for life. Returning to Edinburgh, he needed work. He took whatever job he could find. He polished coffins, delivered coal, worked as a lifeguard at Portobello Open Air Pool, and even posed as a nude model for art students at the Edinburgh College of Art. These jobs paid the bills, but he wanted more. At 21, he found a new passion: bodybuilding. He started training at the Dunedin Weightlifting Club in Edinburgh, learning from former British Army gym instructors. His height of 6 feet 2 inches and muscular build made him stand out. In 1953, at 22 years old, he traveled to London to compete in the Mr. Universe competition. He entered the tall man division for contestants over 5 feet 10 inches. While competing in a bodybuilding contest, he overheard someone talking about auditions for South Pacific. He had no experience, but he went for it. To his surprise, he got a small role as a chorus member. He couldn't sing or dance, but that didn't matter. By the time the production reached Edinburgh, his role had grown. Eventually, he played Lieutenant Buzz Adams, and his pay increased from £12 to £14, 10 shillings per week. That extra money helped, but South Pacific gave him more than just a paycheck. American actor Robert Henderson saw potential in him. He introduced Connery to literature, giving him works by Shakespeare and Ibsen. He also convinced him to take elocution lessons. Connery's thick Scottish accent was part of his charm, but smoothing it out would open more doors. Around this time, he earned a reputation as someone not to mess with. One night in Edinburgh, 6 gang members tried to rob him. He fought them off single-handedly. After that, the gang left him alone. That toughness would later help shape his screen persona. His acting career started slowly. His first credited film role came in No Road Back, 1957, where he played Spike, a minor gangster with a speech impediment. It wasn't a big part, but it got him noticed. To make ends meet, he took side jobs. At one point, he even babysat for journalist Peter Noble. His next major role came in Another Time, Another Place, 1958, where he played a British reporter caught in a wartime affair with Lana Turner's character. This film should have been his big break, but the most dramatic moment happened off-screen. Turner's boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, was a gangster with ties to the Los Angeles mob. He was convinced Turner was having an affair with Connery. One day, he stormed onto the set with a gun. Connery didn't hesitate. He grabbed Stompanato's wrist, twisted it, and forced him to drop the weapon. Security dragged the gangster away. The incident made headlines. Some even whispered that Connery had made enemies in the mob, forcing him to be cautious in Hollywood. Despite the publicity, the film didn't turn him into a star, but he wasn't ready to give up. In 1957, the BBC cast him in Requiem for a Heavyweight, a live television drama about a boxer whose career ends due to injuries. Connery wasn't the first choice. Jack Palance had turned down the role. Director Alvin Rakoff wasn't convinced Connery had the acting skills, but Jacqueline Hill, who later married Rakoff, insisted that women would find him appealing. That was enough to get him the part. The production aired live on March 31st, 1957. There were no retakes. One mistake could ruin everything. Connery played Mountain McClintock, a boxer struggling with the end of his career. The role required both toughness and vulnerability. Connery delivered, and critics noticed. The Listener and The Times praised his performance, calling it one of the best of the night. One of his co-stars in Requiem for a Heavyweight was a young Michael Caine. At the time, they were just two struggling actors. Years later, they would become close friends and co-stars in The Man Who Would Be King. Sean Connery becoming James Bond was a turning point in cinema, but it wasn't an easy journey. When he was cast in Dr. No in 1962, Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, was not happy. He thought Connery was too rough and unpolished. He had imagined Bond as a refined English gentleman, someone like Cary Grant or David Niven. Connery, with his Scottish accent and rugged looks, was the complete opposite. Fleming even called him an overgrown stuntman and doubted he could speak proper English. But the producers, Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, saw something special. Connery had a natural charisma, a mix of danger and charm that made him stand out. Broccoli believed that with the right guidance, Connery could transform into the perfect Bond. Director Terence Young took on the challenge. He introduced Connery to fine dining, tailored suits, and the sophisticated lifestyle that would define the character. When Dr. No was released, everything changed. Audiences loved Connery's Bond. Confident, tough, and effortlessly cool. Fleming was so impressed that he changed Bond's backstory in his 1964 novel, You Only Live Twice, giving him Scottish heritage as a nod to Connery. It was rare for a film actor to influence the literary version of a character, but Connery had done it. His performance became the gold standard for James Bond, shaping the role for decades to come. The success of Dr. No led to bigger and bolder Bond films. Goldfinger in 1964 was a game-changer. It introduced classic Bond elements like the Aston Martin DB5 and larger-than-life villains. The film made $125 million worldwide, a huge number for its time. Thunderball in 1965 took things even further with underwater battle scenes and a massive budget that tripled that of its predecessor. The stakes were higher, the action was bigger, and Connery was at the center of it all. His version of Bond changed spy movies forever. Before him, on-screen spies were either sophisticated intellectuals or tough guys with no charm. Connery blended both. He was sharp, quick-witted, and physically imposing. He could seduce women, outthink villains, and handle brutal fights, all while keeping his composure. His Bond became the template for future action heroes, influencing films like Mission Impossible and The Bourne Identity. Connery also pushed for realism. He often performed his own stunts, which was rare for big stars at the time. In Dr. No, he narrowly escaped injury while driving under a construction crane at high speed. But there were limits. He had a deep fear of spiders, so when filming the famous tarantula scene, he refused to let the spider crawl on him. The crew used a glass pane to separate him from the creature and later brought in a stuntman to finish the shot. By 1967, Sean Connery was tired of being James Bond. He had played the role in 5 films, turning the character into a global icon. He wanted to prove he was more than just a spy in a tuxedo, but Hollywood and the audience wouldn't let him move on. The constant attention from the press made things worse. While filming You Only Live Twice in Japan, paparazzi followed him everywhere. Some even crossed the line, snapping photos of him in a bathroom. That was more than just an invasion of privacy. It was a clear sign that his life no longer felt like his own. That frustration showed on screen. You Only Live Twice was a massive production, with action scenes bigger than ever. But Connery didn't seem as engaged. Critics and fans noticed it too. He still delivered the lines, still looked the part, but something was missing. Some said he seemed bored, off camera. Things weren't any better. He was exhausted by the endless interviews and the pressure of being the face of the franchise. He had been one of the biggest reasons for Bond's success, yet he was starting to wonder if it was worth it. Money became another issue. Connery had made around $1 million for You Only Live Twice, a huge paycheck for the time. But the Bond films were making far more. He believed he deserved a bigger cut. But producers Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman refused to increase his salary. The relationship between them grew tense, and soon the conflict became public. Connery felt undervalued. The films had turned him into a star, but they had also taken over his life. His frustration with the role went beyond money. He resented how much it had come to define him. "I have always hated that damn James Bond. I'd like to kill him," he once said. That wasn't just a passing comment. It reflected how much he wanted to break free. Even his close friend Michael Caine said Bond was a subject to avoid around Connery. He didn't want to talk about it. He wanted to move on. When filming ended, Connery made his decision. He was done with Bond. The producers had no choice but to find a new actor. They chose George Lazenby, a model with no real acting experience. He starred in On Her Majesty's Secret Service in 1969, but the transition wasn't smooth. Lazenby clashed with the production team, and by the time the movie was released, he had already decided to leave. His Bond lasted one film. Connery was gone, but the franchise was struggling to move forward without him. They needed a new Bond, and fast. Roger Moore was busy filming The Persuaders, so they looked elsewhere. They even announced American actor John Gavin as the next 007. But United Artists president David Picker had a different plan. He knew there was only one actor who could bring back the magic. He wanted Connery. Connery had left the franchise after You Only Live Twice in 1967. He was frustrated with the producers and tired of being typecast. He had no intention of coming back. But Picker went around producers Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli and made a direct offer to Connery and his agent. What followed was one of the biggest deals in Hollywood history. Connery agreed to return for a record-breaking salary of $1.25 million. To put that in perspective, it was more than the entire budget of Dr. No in 1962. On top of that, he secured 12.5% of the film's gross revenue. Since Diamonds Are Forever made $116 million at the box office, Connery ended up with an additional $14 million. The deal also included 2 non-Bond films backed by United Artists. Most importantly, Connery would not have to deal with Saltzman and Broccoli at all during production. The studio wasted no time promoting his return. They made it clear Sean Connery was back. Trailers and posters emphasized his comeback, building excitement among fans. But something was off. Connery looked older. He moved slower. His performance lacked the energy of his earlier Bond films. He delivered the lines, but the spark was gone. Audiences noticed. Critics noticed. Connery had done what he was paid to do, but it was clear he was no longer invested in the role. What Connery did with his paycheck, however, was unexpected. He didn't keep any of it. Instead, he used his Diamonds Are Forever salary to establish the Scottish International Education Trust in 1971. He had grown up with limited opportunities, and he wanted to help others avoid the same struggles. The trust provided financial support for talented Scots who couldn't afford higher education. It covered tuition, travel, books, and other educational needs. Connery teamed up with figures like racing legend Sir Jackie Stewart to get it off the ground. Despite the film's financial success, Connery made it clear he was done with Bond. He had never liked the fame that came with playing 007. He felt trapped by the role and frustrated with the way the franchise was run. When the producers offered him $5.5 million to return for Live and Let Die in 1973, he turned it down immediately. That was an incredible sum for the time, but Connery wanted nothing to do with Bond. He gave his approval for Roger Moore to take over, but he wasn't a fan of the franchise's shift toward a lighter, more comedic tone. The story behind Never Say Never Again started decades before the film was made. It all began in the late 1950s when Kevin McClory worked with Ian Fleming and screenwriter Jack Whittingham to create a James Bond movie. Their project never moved forward, but Fleming took their screenplay and turned it into his 1961 novel Thunderball without giving McClory or Whittingham any credit. That led to a major legal battle in 1963. McClory argued that he had rights to the Thunderball story. The court agreed, ruling that he could produce films based on Thunderball while Fleming kept the rights to the novel. McClory then worked with Eon Productions to co-produce Thunderball in 1965. But he was legally blocked from making another Bond film for 10 years. As soon as that restriction ended, he started planning his own Bond movie. That effort led to Never Say Never Again in 1983, a remake of Thunderball. But making the film was not easy. Eon still controlled most of the Bond trademarks, so McClory had to avoid using anything that could lead to another lawsuit. He was allowed to use Spectre and Blofeld, but he could not include Q, M, or the famous gun barrel opening. Even after the film was released, McClory kept fighting for more control. He argued that his screenplay had shaped the cinematic Bond and claimed partial ownership of the character. The courts rejected his claims, but he kept pushing legal challenges for decades. His battle with Eon continued until his death in 2006. The dispute finally ended in 2013 when his heirs sold the remaining Thunderball rights back to Eon, closing a legal fight that had lasted for over 50 years. One of the biggest surprises of Never Say Never Again was the return of Sean Connery as James Bond. He had sworn never to play the role again after Diamonds Are Forever in 1971. But producer Jack Schwartzman made him an offer he could not ignore. $3 million up front, about $8 million today, plus casting approval, script input, a share of the profits, and creative control over key parts of the film. Connery had always clashed with Eon over creative decisions, so this deal gave him the freedom he had always wanted. Connery had a strong influence on the film. He helped pick Klaus Maria Brandauer as Largo and Kim Basinger as Domino. He worked closely with director Irvin Kershner to shape the tone and dialogue. Even the title Never Say Never Again was a joke about his past statements. His wife, Micheline, had suggested it as a reminder that he should never say never. At 52 years old, Connery played a more seasoned Bond, different from the smoother, more playful version Roger Moore was portraying at the same time in Octopussy. The film was a financial success. It grossed over $160 million worldwide, proving that Connery's Bond could still draw audiences. But while the box office results were good, the experience of making the film was anything but enjoyable. Behind the scenes, the production was full of problems. Schwartzman, despite his legal expertise, was inexperienced as a film producer. That left much of the responsibility on Connery and assistant director David Tomblin, who had to step in to keep things running smoothly. The script was another disaster. Lorenzo Semple Jr., known for Flash Gordon, was the first writer, but left due to creative differences. British writers Dick Clement and Ian Lafreniere took over, but they had to be extremely careful to avoid using anything that could lead to another lawsuit from Eon. Every line of dialogue had to be checked by lawyers, which caused long delays. Budget problems made things worse. The underwater sequences, a major part of Thunderball, were expensive and difficult to film. Some action scenes had to be reshot after it was discovered that a body double for Connery looked much younger than him. All these setbacks frustrated Connery, who felt that too many people involved in the film were inexperienced or disorganized. Sean Connery's career after James Bond proved he was more than just a spy. In 1987, Connery played Jimmy Malone in The Untouchables, a crime thriller directed by Brian De Palma. The film followed federal agent Elliot Ness, played by Kevin Costner, as he tried to take down the infamous gangster Al Capone. Connery's character was a tough Irish-American cop who became Ness's mentor. His performance was full of grit and charm, making him the heart of the film. Audiences loved him, and critics praised him. At the 1988 Academy Awards, Connery won Best Supporting Actor. It was the only Oscar of his career. That night, he was already on stage presenting an award when his own name was called. The audience gave him a standing ovation, not just for his win, but for his decades of unforgettable performances. Connery also brought his own creative touch to The Untouchables. One of the most famous lines in the film, bringing a knife to a gunfight, wasn't even in the script. He improvised it on set, and it became one of the movie's most quoted moments. The film was a box office success, earning $106.2 million worldwide. 2 years later, Connery joined another blockbuster. In 1989, he played Henry Jones Sr. in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The role was a perfect fit. Director Steven Spielberg had always said that James Bond was part of the inspiration for Indiana Jones, so casting Connery as Indy's father felt like a tribute. The film showed a different side of him. He played a strict but lovable professor obsessed with the Holy Grail. His chemistry with Harrison Ford made their father-son dynamic one of the highlights of the movie. Connery also found ways to add humor. One of his funniest lines, "She talks in her sleep," was completely unscripted. He made it up on the spot, and the entire crew burst into laughter. Spielberg loved it so much that he kept it in the final cut. The film became the highest-grossing movie of 1989, earning $474.2 million worldwide. It also won an Academy Award for Best Sound Effects Editing. The following year, Connery took on a different kind of role in The Hunt for Red October. Released in 1990, the film was based on Tom Clancy's novel and told the story of a Soviet submarine captain trying to defect to the United States. Connery played Captain Marco Ramius, a commanding and intelligent leader. His performance was so strong that audiences didn't even question why a Russian submarine commander had a Scottish accent. His casting almost didn't happen. Originally, Klaus Maria Brandauer had been chosen for the role, but he dropped out. Connery was then sent the script, but due to a faxing mistake, a keynote explaining the Cold War backdrop was missing. Without that context, Connery thought the story didn't make sense and was ready to turn it down. Once the studio corrected the error, he signed on. The film went on to gross over $200 million worldwide and won an Oscar for Best Sound Editing. Even though Connery had a great sense for picking successful films, he sometimes turned down huge opportunities. One of the biggest was The Lord of the Rings. Director Peter Jackson offered him the role of Gandalf in the trilogy, promising $30 million plus 15% of the box office earnings. That deal could have earned Connery around $450 million, but he turned it down. He later admitted that he just didn't understand the script. Even after reading J.R.R. Tolkien's book, the story didn't make sense to him. Ian McKellen took the role instead, and his performance became legendary. Connery later said that McKellen was marvelous as Gandalf, showing no regret over his decision. This wasn't the only major role he declined. He also passed on playing John Hammond in Jurassic Park and the architect in The Matrix. If a story didn't click with him, he wouldn't take the role, no matter how big the paycheck. By the early 2000s, Connery was growing tired of Hollywood. His final live-action film was The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, released in 2003. The production was a mess. He clashed with director Stephen Norrington, calling him insane and a lunatic. Even after filming ended, Connery tried to fix the film in the editing room, but there was little he could do. The movie was overshadowed by Pirates of the Caribbean, which was released the same summer. Critics weren't kind, and the experience left Connery frustrated with the film industry. In 2006, he officially announced his retirement while accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Film Institute. He was done with acting and had no interest in coming back. Even when Spielberg offered him a chance to return as Henry Jones Sr. in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he turned it down. Retirement, he said, was too much fun to give up. His final acting credit came in 2012 when he voiced the lead character in Sir Billy, an animated Scottish film. It wasn't a grand farewell, but Connery didn't need one. He had already built a legendary career. Sean Connery's personal life was as dramatic as the roles he played on screen. He married Australian actress Diane Cilento in 1962, the same year he became James Bond in Dr. No. Their marriage lasted 11 years, filled with jealousy, control, and allegations of abuse. Cilento, an Oscar-nominated actress, later wrote in her autobiography that Connery resented her success. She claimed he pressured her to turn down roles and refused to hire domestic help, leaving her to manage everything on her own. Cilento and Connery separated in 1971 and finalized their divorce in 1973. After their split, she continued to speak about the abuse she suffered. She claimed Connery's fame made him insecure and controlling. When she passed away in 2011, her story resurfaced, bringing renewed attention to the darker side of Connery's past. By then, Connery had been married to his second wife, Micheline Roquebrune, for over 35 years. They met in 1970 at a golf tournament in Morocco and married in 1975. She was a French-Moroccan painter who spoke French and Spanish, while Connery barely knew either language. They later joked that they communicated through body language in the early days of their relationship. Their marriage lasted until Connery's death in 2020. Unlike his first marriage, there were no public allegations of abuse. Rumors of infidelity surfaced over the years, but Roquebrune never addressed them. They built a quiet life together in the Bahamas, far from Hollywood, with Connery often calling her the love of my life. In his final years, Connery battled dementia. His wife revealed that the disease had taken its toll, making it difficult for him to communicate or recognize those around him. He passed away peacefully in his sleep on October 31, 2020, at his home in Nassau, Bahamas. He was 90 years old. His death certificate listed pneumonia and respiratory failure as the causes. 2 years later, in 2022, his ashes were scattered in Scotland at undisclosed locations, honoring the country he loved. Despite the controversies, Connery remained one of the most celebrated actors of his time. In 2000, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his contributions to film and Scottish culture. The ceremony took place at Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh, where Connery wore full Highland dress, including the MacLeod tartan. He later said it was one of the proudest days of my life. Even late in his career, Connery's appeal never faded. In 1989, People magazine named him Sexiest Man Alive at 59 years old, making him the oldest recipient of the title. When asked about it, he laughed and said, "It's all downhill from here." A decade later, at 69, he was named Sexiest Man of the Century, proving that charisma mattered more than age. His presence on screen was unmatched. Director Steven Spielberg once said, "Connery was one of only 7 true movie stars in the world. He had something few actors ever achieve: a lasting, larger-than-life persona."